Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. Today's show is the United States in Cultural Disintegration. I came across a great article in the Post Millennial a few weeks ago about a panel that my friend Jack Posobiec was on in Kenosha, Wisconsin, run by a group called Myth Informed for a Better Discourse, Panel for a Better Discourse. And the political radicals title, Birth of a Radical Ideology or Identity. And this quote jotted me from my guest today. Quote, "Is there anything in America that hasn't become politicized?" Unquote, Jack Posobiec asked. And indeed, really, there isn't. Is that more clear and apparent than when discussing the topic of radicalization? The article goes on to quote, AOC has spoken about how it's a positive thing that leftists have been radicalized in 2020 due to the protests and riots that rocked the nation in the wake of George Floyd's death in Minneapolis. But extremism and radicalization has been decried when it has impacted those on the right, primarily Trump supporters, as exemplified by the Capitol riot of January 6th. Mr. Posobiec went on to say that they want to put all these people into different buckets. Identity politics has been a tool of radicalization, and as it has become more and more part of mainstream life, it's at zoos, he noted, it's at our cultural institutions. What is identity? What does it mean? What is extremism and radicalization? The moderator asked. Posobiec pointed out the numbers of left-wing extremists showing that extremism has no partisan bias, and he's right. For him, much of the issue has to do with the lack of available mental health services. To quote Mr. Posobiec, censorship is driving people into social media ghettos, unquote. Jack noted, saying that social media censorship funnels people into like-minded chats that fuel each other further and further into extremism. But the question was, quote, how do you prevent people from breaking free of that teamification of politics, unquote, Poso asked. It's not what's best for the country, it's what's best for my team. Now, we need to get back to the idea that it's not what can help my team win, but what are the outcomes you're driving for? It's a great piece, folks, and strikes at the heart of the matter that's going on today in American society, that we have become and are becoming more extreme, and that extreme thinking is disintegrating the seams that bind us together. Those are equal treatment under the law, the common idea that our country has evolved to become the greatest of all time, the GOAT, and that all are equal regardless of the status of their birth or skin color or whatever. That's why I invited One America's News reporter, Navy veteran, film producer, and author Jack Posobiec, and dad and husband, by the way, to talk about this existential threat. Jack, welcome back to the Rob Maness Show, my friend.
Oh, Colonel, thank you so much. Wow, what an intro. I mean, I sound so smart. I'm like, I want to hear this guest he's talking about. Oh, wait, he's talking.
Well, I appreciate you coming back on. We talked before the show, folks, and Mr. Posobiec's family are doing really fine. They've got a new youngin'. Just started sleeping through the night, right, Jack?
The 5-month-old has just started sleeping through the night, so the bags under my eyes is not as deep as they usually are. And year-old, he turns 3 on Friday. You know, he keeps us running around like crazy trying to chase him down, because he's at that point where he has this unlimited energy, which is amazing because he eats nothing. He literally doesn't think, we can't get him to eat throughout the day. He eats like a couple here, a couple of bites there, and he just go. And I'm like, man, I can't imagine where he gets that from. I don't even know anybody.
Well, hey, man, I appreciate you coming on with me. I know you're a busy guy, and I know you're still in the milder military occupation up in Washington, D.C.
Right.
It's good that we can kind of chuckle about that, but that was a big deal and is a big deal that I think will be part of our discussion, at least tangentially today. But you know, I mentioned that you were a film producer, and I want to dive right into this cultural, I call it disintegration at the seams. And you heard my intro, the seams that hold us together, the commonalities, equality under the law, equality of opportunity. Doesn't matter where or how you're born and what you're born into, you have the same rights and opportunity and equality. You're not guaranteed anything, but you have those no matter what you are. And it seems that the society is moving away from that very quickly, very dramatically. In this panel you were on with this group, I don't think most folks that are really have any awareness of that type of panel, the myth-informed panel I'm talking about up in Kenosha. So I wanted to give you a chance to talk about that a little bit, but also talk about why you said some of the things I mentioned in my intro. What's underlying that? You produced a film called Antifa, so you have a lot of knowledge from the leftist and anarchist side of the aisle, so to speak, when it comes to attacking American culture and the things that I mentioned that are strong and hold us together. I mean, where do you think, why did you say some of those things, and where do you think we're going?
Well, I appreciate that and the opportunity, and I also thank Myth Informed for putting together the Better Discourse. It was really an event, and this was just one of the panels they held there. Some others that were on policing and censorship and various other issues that are going on, hot button issues. And what they did was they actually brought together people from all sides of the aisle, the left, the right, the middle, the back, the front, the up, the down, and to just kind of hash things out. And we sort of had some ground rules about, hey, no personal attacks. Let's actually try to have a substantive discussion instead of just sort of the back and forth like we would normally get to on social media, which always seems to prevent us from actually getting anything solved because we're always too busy worrying about trying to, win the argument, win the fight. But, what's your reward should be better policy and should be better outcomes for everybody. And, when you look at the United States of America and the history of our country, you really realize as you compare it to other countries in the world that it is something that's quite unique. The United States came about through a specific founding, right? Most countries don't have that. I'm Polish by background. Other countries have a, sort of an organic, natural, group of people lived in a place. Then eventually they, became a kingdom. They fought wars with other places. They carved out their piece of the land, a piece of the pie. They defended it, and then through that defense, that, issued their national history as well as their culture, their heritage, and their ideals and beliefs. And so and that go throughout history. But the United States is separate because it was people came to a specific country, founded or specific land, founded that country on a certain set of ideals, and then put them into practice and generated this incredible engine. So the people who came here, our ancestors, all of us, or if anyone's watching is an immigrant like my wife, they come here because they want to participate in this. And in the same way that we had those ground rules at the conference I was at and on that panel, those are some of the same ground rules we have here in the United States. Those ideas of, one man, one vote, freedom of speech, the right to a fair trial from an impartial jury, the right to worship as you see fit, so religious pluralism, the idea of freedom of religion, that we would have a free press, that you would have media, independent media, right? Remember, Thomas Paine, pamphleteers, etc. This country was founded, absolutely founded on independent media. When you see freedom of the press in the First Amendment, they weren't talking about, the Crown's media. They weren't talking mainstream media, the media of the powerful. No. It was of the people that they were talking about, that this was the Stamp Act, right? The idea that only approved media or allowed media, endorsed media, official media channels, right, would be allowed. No, none of that. This was free media, free pamphleteers. The printing press was just taking off, of course, so the newspapers were getting started. This was the idea. Benjamin Franklin was a newspaper man. He also did the the Poor Richard's Almanac, and so many of the founders, this was very, very clear to them that this was the free exchange of ideas, information, back and forth dialogue, that as long as you can do all of that and treat others with respect, live by the golden rule, right, that we can have a very successful country. And we were the most successful country in the world until, and this would be my contention, that we started walking away from those, that we started saying, no, what if we could just go back to the sort of team sports of, the old world, and pitting this group against that group, and which group is the haves and which group is the have-nots, and how do we do all of these sort of group politics, collective politics against one another, rather than getting into the individualism. And I do think that I'm not, sort of one of these libertine guys who doesn't think that there's any role for community, right? I am, I'm a Catholic, I'm a Christian by way of background. So, we do believe in strong communities and strong families. And I do think there's a huge role for that. And at the same time, right, you want it to be, as Washington said, government is like fire, right? It can be very useful, but it can also be extremely destructive. So you want to use you don't want to not use it, but you want to use just enough of it so that it's beneficial. I think that's something that we need to understand as well, that we can't use government to enact what they call equity now. So we can't give everyone equal outcomes, because that's not realistic reality. And every time that's been tried in the past to use the power of government, my wife is from the Soviet Union, she'll tell you, it does not end very well, right?
No, it never does. It never does. And I would point out, folks, to our viewers here, we can see the comments and we appreciate you commenting on everything, but it's this type of media that the founders were talking about, to put it in today's terms, the Thomas Paines and the pamphleteers and the Benjamin Franklins. They were independent. They were independent. It's not the Crown's media, which is what I consider like CNN and even Fox News, and the corporate media today is all pro-government or the other, isn't it, Jack?
Yeah, and I think that what you're seeing now is that there has been, with the rise of the internet, and especially Internet 2.0, with shows like this that we're able to do, with conversations that we're able to have through social media, you've seen a democratization of information. You've seen a new blossoming of hundreds, thousands of different forms of media out there. That's so good. And so for people that are in sort of these entrenched kind of power chambers of the United States or of the world, they're missing out, because they used to have the ability to set influence, to set agendas. Lobbyists right here in the city of Washington were able to push forward whatever they wanted, and they could spin it into that nobody would be able to question them, because you didn't have any other options, or because people who were asking questions were pushed aside with the power of what used to be called gatekeepers. Well, and there certainly are still gatekeepers. However, there are still the gatekeepers are diminishing in their power again and again as the new media comes along. And this is why they detest independent media so much. This is why they want to shut down and censor and filter, because just like every other censor throughout history, they say it's for your own good, for your own safety, for your own betterment. We have to protect you from the bad information that's out there, because only we are the purveyors of truth and knowledge and enlightenment. And we've seen this again and again throughout history. And this is why they call themselves disinformation reporters or extremism reporters. And this, my actual piece was on. And so when I said, are we going to talk about extremism? You go to one of these groups and they'll say, okay, so let's talk about extremism. We're going to talk about the extremism of the Farrakhan supporter that just murdered a Capitol Police officer just, about 200 feet away from where I'm sitting right now, but driving his car at the building. Are we going to talk about extremism of radical Islam that's conducted terrorist attacks throughout the world, that continues to conduct terrorist attacks throughout the world? Is that the type of extremism we're going to talk about? Oh, no. You want to talk about, the blue-haired grandmas that were climbing the steps of the Capitol building and went inside without permission. And, like that's some actual threat to our system of government. No, it's very clear what's going on, that one side is getting, and don't get me wrong, like I'm not like a January 6th apologist or something like that. There are definitely people who broke the law there. But at the same time, who break the law every single night when they're going out in these cities across our country, not only with the lawlessness and rise in murder that we've seen that nobody seems to want to talk about, but also with these roving militias that we see in many places, and sometimes armed now, increasingly, like we saw in Plano, Texas. We're now seeing across the South. We're seeing in major cities where they're going out, whether it's Antifa, whether it's members of BLM that are becoming violent. You typically see this at night. I saw this in Chaz last year when I went out there, that Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, which was established in Seattle. And I wrote a whole book about this type of extremism that's going on, that for some reason, the mainstream media, the FBI, and others do not want to talk about and do not want to do anything about. In fact, the FBI under Chris Wray, and I write a whole chapter about this in the book. I have all of his conversations with President Trump, where Trump is talking to him about, will you go after Antifa? Will you go after these groups? And Wray is just spinning and twisting the wind every time that the president asked him to do something about this. Meanwhile, Chad Wolf, the Department of Homeland Security, is asking for more security, more federal troops night after night for that federal courthouse in Portland. Chris Wray won't do anything about it. Now we find out that the Steve Scalise shooter, this guy who clearly was a domestic terrorist, clearly assassinate Republican congressman, was a far left-wing believer, believed in conspiracies such as the Russia conspiracy theory, wanted to go and kill Republicans because he thought that Republicans were traitors. And again, these are all statements of fact. Right? This is not statements of fact. The FBI classified that as suicide by cop. They didn't classify that as domestic terrorism. So when I say that our institutions have begun to decay and that our institutions are no longer impartial, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And so Chris Wray is a big star in this Antifa book that I've put out.
I can't wait to get a copy of it, Jack, because you're right on target from what I can see. And I've got a little bit of a background in bomb disposal and hunting terrorists and intelligence work, and a little bit of cyber ops and everything. So I don't get why. I just don't get it. Sitting here, my 59-year-old boomer self, why in the hell is the FBI going after blue-haired MAGA grandmas that trespassed? Okay, yeah, trespassing is against the law, and like you said, we're not apologists for anybody that did stupid stuff on January 6th, but I demand that they be given the same equal treatment under the law that the people out in Portland get that are Antifa, and the BLM people in Minnesota get, and New York City get. We demand that everybody is treated the same under the law, but they haven't found the pipe bomb setters yet from January 5th at the DNC and Republican National Committee headquarters. We have video of them. In one of the videos, it looks like the individual's on a cell phone. To me, what in the heck is going on when we have that? And that's a January 6th issue from my perspective. Why are they going all the way to Alaska to go after grandma and beauty salon people who may or may not have done anything violent or wrong? And these other folks are still walking free. And we have the intelligence capability to know where they're at, who they are, and what they were doing, and where they are now.
We're just going into that pipe bomb incident where we can see the person, and I won't even say him or her because you just can't tell from these images. But Washington, D.C., Capitol Hill, there are cameras all over this city and specifically that area of our city. The idea that none of those homes, that none of this area, that none of the police, none of the surveillance footage, CCTV, are not able to follow this person when they went back to whether they came from a car, whether they rode an Uber, whether, as you say, they were using some kind of cell phone. What was the phone? What kind of number it was on? It strains credulity to have us think that they don't have any idea who that is, and they're asking the general public to identify them based off of a pair of shoes that they're wearing, which is the only real identifier that I can see in this video. It's ridiculous. Where's the CSI? Where's the, you mean to tell me there's no information whatsoever on these pipe bombs? You know EOD much better than I do, but I did a little EOD familiarization when I was with one of the teams in the Navy.
Yeah.
And there's so much that we can do from a pipe bomb. There's so much information. There's biometrics that you can get. There's fingerprints you can get. Of course, the classic fingerprints, which have been used for almost 150 years. So the idea that they haven't been able to find anything about these, where any of the components were purchased, et cetera, it really, really boggles the mind. The FBI is more willing to go after this. And quite frankly, I think the reason that the FBI is doing what they're doing is to cover up for their failures, to cover up for their mistakes, cover up for the fact that they can't stop the pipelines from being shut down from cyber hackers. They haven't been able to stop terrorist attacks in years. They haven't had a significant terrorist prosecution in a very, very long time. The attack happen. Illegal guns are rampant in just about every single major city of the United States. Where are the FBI and ATF on this? The Joint Terrorism Task Forces that exist, 56 JTTFs throughout the country, are not able to stop these things. And so they can, yes, of course, use a hammer and use a heavy hand and heavy glove when they need to. But we look at that case up in Alaska where they just went after these spa owners, and it may have actually been a case of mistaken identity. Do you know how they got that tip, Colonel?
It was from a flight attendant, right? That was mad at him about some mask discussion they had, and she took it off of a passenger list.
Now, from what we can tell, reading the search warrant on all of this, that this was not FBI biometrics, facial recognition, CSI technology, the different TV shows and the sort of James Bond stuff. No, this was a woman who had a dispute with a stewardess or a steward or a flight attendant on Alaska Airlines. Then, and this part is blacked out, so we can only infer from the document that was given and was later unsealed that somebody from Alaska Airlines, someone from that incident or connected to that incident, then went days after the incident, looked up a person on the FBI's list from January 6th, thought that it may have looked like this person, and then gave the passenger's identity to the FBI, hoping that the FBI would go after them. So that's what the FBI is doing. They're taking tips from disgruntled flight attendants. They're taking tips from left-wing Twitter and Blue Anon. I call them Blue Anon conspiracy theorists. That's what the FBI is getting their knowledge from. This isn't analysis. This isn't CSI. This isn't Jack Bauer. Right? This is them going online or watching the Rachel Maddow show or having Joy Reid's followers send in tips and having neighbors and people settle petty disputes by trying to get them swatted by the FBI. Meanwhile,
they saved the classified subpoenas for, like Rudy Giuliani and those kind of people that they're going after from a political perspective.
Oh, of course. Right. And they'll tell us that they're going after these people in terms of national security, right? What has Rudy Giuliani ever done to damage our national security, right? Has he sold Russians or to the Chinese or the Iranians? No, of course not. And it would be silly to even argue that. This kind of conduct is what is making the United States lose face in the international sphere. This is what's making us look silly. It makes us look like a banana republic. This is the type of stuff that you see happening in South America. It is not usually the type of stuff you see happening in the United States of America. And again, it goes back to our institutions and our institutions having this type of failure, this level of unprofessionalism, and having a degradation from where they once stood.
Yeah, I mean, it's also what you used to see in the old Soviet Union with the GRU and the KGB going after political opponents of whoever was either ascending or in the power and those kind of things. So it's very compelling to be an observer of this and a citizen in the United States, still free from my perspective in our little bubble here, but watching the society just pull itself apart at the seams. You're a lot closer to the generation that's growing up, that's coming of age, and will soon be in positions of power, much more so than they are today. What are their thoughts on this as a group, Jack? I mean, are they worried about it?
Well, speaking for myself, just generationally, I was, when it comes to sort of the role between government and the people, right? They don't have this idea that the government is this separate entity. It's this: the government provides you with things, the government gives you things. There's no set difference of, oh well, the government is just this organization that sort of provides us with the backbone of our society, that gives us courts, that gives us basic public services. No. There's a completely separate relationship between the self and the state when it comes to the idea of the millennials. And then also the idea that the student debt crisis being what it is, people have been told, people feel that they've been lied to. People feel that they were lied to from the idea of, hey, go to college, get into debt, you'll have your student debt, but you'll be able to get a job and pay it off, and you'll be doing fine. You're doing just fine, right? That didn't happen for most people in my generation. A lot of that is due to the financial crisis. A lot of that hit right in 2008 when many of us were getting into the workforce. A lot of it's to do with the credit crunch, all the Wall Street completely tanking, and the government coming forward and saying, we're going to bail out the banks. We're not going to do anything for you. And meanwhile, in the backdrop of all this, you've got the war on terror. So join the military, go fight in the Middle East, right? For a country that you've never heard of, that doesn't affect you or your family directly. Or you could go into the job market where there aren't any jobs. So myself, I joined the military and ended up going to the Navy, where I served with a focus on China. But then you had so many people that, because of the economic situations they went through in those formative years, they were not able to attain the kind of wealth formation that the parents had, whether Gen X, baby boomer generations, with negative interest rates being what they are. You are not able to get to a point where they could start accumulating wealth. So you're seeing more divorces. You're seeing people push off family formation into later in their 30s in many cases, not getting married, living with parents. All of these are due to economic issues. Now, with the Zoomers, they don't have that kind of situation. Well, I should have said they didn't at first, but now with what we're
doing, wait a minute, Jack.
Literally,
what's
today,
a Zoomer? Define
so Zoomer. A Zoomer is born late 90s or early 2000s. Okay. So a Zoomer is like around 20 right now, 2021. With a Zoomer, or 22, 21, I don't mean the year. So with a Zoomer, they're now starting to get into their formative years through the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdowns and the massive, massive inflation that is just around the corner. So they're going to have problems with wealth formation as well. But that being said, because they didn't live through 9/11, WMDs in Iraq, these sort of lies being pushed by the government, the financial crisis, they have a more pragmatic look, I think, when it comes to things. They just want the volatility to stop. They don't like going to podcasts and hosts and TV shows where it seems like people are always yelling or screaming at each other or being, kind of like what we were talking about earlier. They don't go in so much for extremism, for the most part. I'm not saying it doesn't exist.
That's good news.
And it always will. It's just a question of what you do about it. But it's also a question of, are you able to allow these societal pressures to be relieved through the process of democracy? And we used to always be told that democracy was a pressure valve. Elections are a pressure valve, that people feel like they're being heard. They feel like they're able to have a say in society. They're able to have a say in political life, right? The life of the polity. So they are able then to go forward and know that they have a stake, not just a stake, but a say in what's going on.
Right.
Now, when it comes to Zoomers, I've found people, they like Joe Rogan, they like Tim Pool, they like a lot of these shows where it's not necessarily, oh, I'm on this side or I'm on that side. I'm just talking about the issues in a laid back, matter of fact way, Barstool Sports, and trying to explain things from a good faith standpoint going forward. They don't like brands, they don't like corporate brands, and that's something I think is, kind of gives me hope that they have really rejected a lot of these, sort of name brand, or we're CNN and we say this, or we're, News Corp and we say this, that they just want to talk to a person perspective and find out what's going on. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't people out there on other sides. It doesn't mean there aren't people that don't fall into these, different buckets, and they certainly do exist. And just on that question of extremism, since I did bring it up, and they mentioned it in the panel, but I don't know if the article really got my full thoughts across. When they asked the question about extremism, the sort of the lefty guy, liberal guy that was on the panel with us, I think he would describe himself as progressive. He brought up mass shootings, and he said, well, does political extremism lead to more mass shootings? And you could argue that it does or it doesn't, and it kind of depends on how you define mass shootings. But we certainly know that there are mass shootings that are conducted by political extremists, and they have been, regardless of what you want to say about the number. And the thing that I will always come back to and say is, and this is where I got my response, that I think that was poorly served, the United States was poorly served by the shutting down of our mental institutions from the 70s to the 90s, on the entire public health system for mental institutions, for not making that available to people, and instead going now to the more psychiatric, you go and get your prescription, and then you're sent back out on the street model, right? There are certainly people, and how many times does one of these shootings happen where you go back and they say, you know what? I always thought there was something about this person, or I tried to report them to the police. I tried to report them to the authorities. How many times, especially in some of these cases like school shootings, unfortunately,
right,
that we're told that authorities did have them on the radar, but for whatever reason, nothing was ever really done about it. Well, if you had institutions where people could be cared for, where people could be given medical attention, could be given the proper support that they need, you would have less of an issue with this. But we shut them down rather quickly, and with a knee-jerk response to movies like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and a couple various issues that were going on in certain parts of the country. And hey, it made sense. Politicians didn't want to have to pay for it anymore. They said, not my idea. Pharmaceutical companies, of course, wanted more customers, wanted more clients. The insurance companies knew they were going to get paid for it because the government was involved. So it just made sense. But the problem, and I think that not only is that exacerbating the political extremism issue, at least when it comes to mass shootings, but it's also exacerbating our homeless crisis that's going on in the country right now. That when you look at many of these cases, that people that are living on the streets are people that would or should be in some form of mental health care. And they're not getting that because our country is not making it available to them. So, call me a lefty, call me a liberal if you want to, but on that issue, right? On that issue, that's something where it's like, come on, you got to do something here. And if it makes sense for that to be a public service, then so be it. Now, maybe, if it's better for it to be private run, but, you do it like like one of these charter schools, and as opposed to direct government run, whatever you have to do to make it, to make it be safe and make it, be, have a proper standard of care for everybody. We don't want these to just be places where we can brush people aside, obviously. But I
don't think most people today would call you a lefty for thinking that. I mean, I've run for office before, and I've run on that as a platform that we have dumped our mentally ill out into the streets. Just look at all the homeless areas from the capital to Los Angeles and Seattle and Sacramento, and I mean, it's crazy out there, and most of that is a lack of mental health care. And when you think about the mass shootings at the school up in Connecticut, mass shootings at the theater in Colorado, the shooting where Gabby Giffords was shot, all of those people were under mental health conditions where they were either being treated or had medications and weren't taking them. So I'm not going to say that there aren't any politically motivated mass shootings, because we know there are, especially on the jihadist side. And maybe Dylan Roof was one too. But what I am saying is that I'm in violent agreement with you, is that we've got to do something. Does government have to create facilities and all that? No, but what government does do well is provide funding and rules that go with the funding, and then enforcement of the funding. Let's make it happen. It's like welfare. The government giving people money doesn't work. Look at how we've destroyed the African American family. The Black American family has been destroyed since the 1960s because of government policies. But there is a way to do it. Bedford-Stuyvesant in New York, Senator Robert F. Kennedy was a big advocate of that. The corporation still exists, and that was government helping and entrepreneurs and innovators helping a community become a community of small businesses that could be safe and successful. So there is a way to do it, and a way for government to be involved.
Well,
and I totally agree.
When you hear Joe Biden today, talk about the economic side, saying that, well, you've got to get off unemployment if you've been given a suitable job offer, right? It's like this, and this is my contention on Biden. People can disagree, but I actually think that he doesn't understand that unemployment fraud exists in this country and is rampant in this country. How are you going to enforce that, Joe Biden? How are you going to enforce that if someone's been giving a suitable offer that they can't receive unemployment benefits? It doesn't make any sense. People are going to figure out how to get around that because it's easy to get around that. Obviously, they're going to say whatever they have to say to get the money, keep the money flowing. And why is that? Because human nature is real. It is immutable. Thomas Hobbes is right. This is what religion tells us, of course, that, if you make this available to people, they are going to find a way to get it. People respond to incentives. It's simple as that. And so him saying, well, we're going to create a rule that says that they can't do that anymore. Joe, you're not going to fix human nature. But some people think that oh, he's doing this on purpose because, he wants unemployment to be up. No, I actually think he just doesn't understand what he's doing. I think he has no clue what he's doing in terms of this, in terms of many of these things. I think he's someone who's just been, such a Washington, D.C. kind of creature sort of stereotype for so many years that he only sees things in terms of Washington, D.C. He's been here his entire adult life. I mean, think about that. Your entire adult life being spent in Washington, D.C., having lobbyists tell you one thing and you repeat it for how many years, 40 years. And so it doesn't surprise me that he says these things that have been debunked thousands of times, literally thousands of times, because he honestly doesn't know the difference.
I agree with you. I mean, 50 years in Washington makes you very myopic.
He's been here since the last gas shortage.
He was here during the last gas shortage.
He was right here in D.C. Just down the street, smooth offices.
Yeah, and I tweeted a picture of a sign that I was going through a drive-through to get some ice cream for my son and my wife on Sunday, and they had a sign taped to the menu that said, "Hey, we're closed on Sundays," and this was not Chick-fil-A, folks. Hey, we're closed on Sunday due to the labor shortage. We cannot afford to stay open. This is a fast food restaurant, a mainstream one. And I tweeted that at Joe Biden because he had said, well, our efforts are not keeping people from going back to work, which just common sense tells everybody outside of the Beltway that that's just not true. It's human nature, as you said, Jack. It's human nature. And you know what? The government did this to people. I get
by the way, Colonel,
about this. I'm all for the government taking care of people, but we haven't really taken care of people.
I'll even say, I'll even do you one better, is that I am completely sure right now that there are millions of people who are working, right? But what are they doing? They're getting paid under the table, right? So it's not on the books, and then also doubling up and getting unemployment benefits because it's so easy to get those benefits, right? And because the system is not checked, right? And so rather than sit there and say, well, we're just going to think our way into how to fixing it, right? You really need to understand that the incentives are going to be there because you put them there. And so unless you change that incentive structure, then you can't just come up and say, oh, well, we're going to fix it. You haven't fixed it in 50 years, Joe, right?
Absolutely.
You have to get back to an incentive-based structure, as you've outlined. Otherwise, yes, of course, people are going to be responding to that because they're people.
Yeah, and if you really want to know how bad the corruption is and the fraud is in that, follow a guy named Adam Housley. Folks may remember Adam. He was a Fox News reporter, a baseball pitcher professionally. Now he owns a winery out in Napa Valley, but he's following it in California. You can see just how bad it is if you follow him on Twitter.
Oh, has that been? I think
he puts stuff out every once in a while. Yeah, he's following it very closely, and he can't get. It's interesting because he wants to just put the information out there and get the politicians to do something, at least acknowledge that there's a problem. And I don't think he could even get them to acknowledge there's a problem. And this is not just some guy like me out there yelling at the wall. I mean, he does really independent, fact-based reporting still when he puts.
And what's the Democrats' excuse for California? By the way, the Democrat Party has a super majority House and Senate. Yeah. They control the governor. They've controlled the governor for how many years, right? That is the Democrat superstate of California. It's also, by the way, you've got almost all the richest people in the country there, the most powerful companies, right? You have everything you could possibly want, Democrats, in California, right? And don't get me wrong, I'm not one of these guys who isn't afraid to criticize Republicans when they deserve it. They deserve it quite frequently. But what is their excuse? Really, what is their excuse for California being in the state it's in when it has been under their management for 2 full generations at this point? And people are going to say, oh, what about Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? What about Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? Arnold Schwarzenegger was largely liberal in terms of his politics, even though, yes, of course, he was in the Republican Party. And I see Caitlyn Jenner's running right now. Said some things that sound more conservative, certainly on crime, but also said that I believe the position was for allowing illegal immigrants to stay in a path to citizenship. Now, obviously, the governor of California doesn't provide for a path to citizenship for anyone because that's not the role. But again, clearly not something that a conservative would say.
Not at all. Not at all. As many I see many so-called punditry in the Republican side excited about that run, and I'm not excited at all about that run. And you're absolutely right. That's why Newsom's recall is on the ballot.
Well, I think it'll come down to name ID like anything else, and you get to a big celebrity like Jenner in there, and you gotta think that that's going to be worth a lot of percentage points.
It may very well happen. We'll see what happens if it does.
And then next we'll get Kim Kardashian running for president. Maybe she'll run against Kanye.
Yeah, that would be interesting, and that would get a lot of play actually in the media. All right, man, I would be remiss if I didn't turn this conversation towards a little bit of national security and the subject partially of China. And we've mentioned China a couple times in our discussion here. But, you lived there for several years, right? If I remember correctly, you speak Mandarin and read Mandarin fluently, which is saying something. It's the most difficult language to master that exists from what I know. So what do you think their strategy is, their strategic, what are they looking at strategically is probably the best way. I don't want to talk about their strategy, but what are they thinking strategically? Because, you just retweeted an article about China has overtaken the rest of the adversarial countries as putting the most into influence operations in the United States. So what's your perspective from someone that's lived there, that speaks the language, that understands the ways of the Communist Chinese Party, which is really the adversary, not the people of China, but the Communist Chinese Party? What are they thinking strategically from the perspective of achieving their goals?
Well, sure, and it's actually quite simple, and you could overcomplicate it, and I could get into a lot of intricate details, but the fact of the matter remains is China wants to be the superpower of the world, the hegemon of the world, and they want the United States to be in a vassal status to China. They do not want to destroy the United States, by the way, as some people might tell you. They don't want to bomb the U.S. into oblivion. No, they want us to be they are consummate consumers of Chinese goods. They want us to be able to be making just enough money that we can continue to buy the big screen Chinese TVs, Chinese laptops, Chinese car parts that they put in U.S. manufacturers. You look at a U.S. manufacturer and of course it says Ford or GM on the cover, but how many of those parts on the inside are all made in China, right? You understand that this is the way the business works now.
So when it comes to Apple, et cetera, yes, again, same idea. U.S. product made in China. So that's what they want the U.S. to be. And anything that gets in the way of that, whether it be human rights, whether it be civil liberties, freedom of speech, or giving away the truth about a deadly disease that may or may not have leaked from your BSL-4 lab in Wuhan, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's something that's just seen as priced into, the investment in terms of what China is trying to do, right? They want to progress at as fast a rate as possible. They want to be in the position where the United States was sort of at the end of the Cold War. And I remember you would hear many of these historians at the time, or these great political thinkers who told us that when the Soviet Union fell, it was the end of history. I'm sure you remember that there would be no more communism, that liberal democracy would sweep the world, starting with the Middle East. And this led to sort of U.S. adventurism in the Middle East in many cases, this idea of nation building, that we would have democracy would sweep the Middle East, democracy would then sweep China, sweep the entire world, starting in Russia. Russia would be democracy, liberal democracy, and all the rest of it. Well, it just hasn't quite seemed to work out that way. And so with these international institutions that the United States erected and has propped up, like the United Nations, NATO, et cetera, the WHO, what China has done has known that since the U.S. shows deference to these institutions, they've done their absolute best to subvert these institutions, to go into them and to get them to do their bidding. The World Trade Organization is a great example of this. The United States allowed China into the club and thought that being a member of the club would change China's ways. Meanwhile, China gets invited into the club, and then they turn around to each other and say, and this is, of course, CCP leaders I'm talking about. So the CCP gets invited in. They say, look, they let us in, the fools. Now we're on the inside. Now we know what to do, right? And so no, we're not going to change them. If anything, they're going to change us. And they have shown the wherewithal. They've shown the national will to do so in a way that the United States simply has not shown since the 1950s and sort of the post-war era. So China is now embarking on a global form of what you could call debt trap diplomacy in a way that hasn't been seen since the days of the British Empire, really. This is something where they will go into third world countries, or excuse me, developing countries. I'm not supposed to say third world countries anymore, and extend to them lines of credit in order to build typically port facilities, but in many cases infrastructure, real infrastructure, not whatever Joe Biden was calling infrastructure, but roads, highways, railroads, bridges, airports, etc. And then when the country can't pay back, China will say, well, that's fine. Just give us some of those mineral rights over there. Give us some access to those cobalt, rare earth minerals. Oh, yeah, you're a country on the African coast of the Atlantic Ocean. Well, I'm sure you wouldn't mind if we just brought in our naval vessels to be able to port in your harbors and your ports that are there on the Atlantic Ocean. So I really do wonder what it will be that wakes up the politicians in Washington D.C., because that's where the influence operations are being targeted. By the way, it's on the politicians. It's not necessarily on the people. I think most people in the United States kind of get this, and poll after poll shows that China has vastly diminished in terms of their standing with the American people and really with the people of the world. Not to mention what they've done in India, what they've done in Europe, et cetera, et cetera. But when you look at this, you have to, and personally, I thought that militarizing the South China Sea would wake people up, but no, it didn't wake anybody up. And when I was in the military, I was in the IC, we could see them. They're putting the sand in, they're building the island. Okay, the island is built. Well, now they're militarizing the island. All right, now they've militarized it. Now they're running aircraft carrier drills with a fighter wing off of the island. All right, no, nobody's paying attention to this. Okay, maybe when they start doing that kind of stuff off the coast of Africa in the Atlantic Ocean, right, on our side of the hemispheres, maybe that will start getting people to wake up. But I really don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah, I don't. I think the politicians, and from my perspective, the big corporate boards and leadership too, I think, is a target of their influence operations.
Well, not only that, because there is so much mercantile interest in this country in looking at China and their 1.4 billion population as markets for their products, right? This is what Disney's doing now. This is what all the big companies are doing now. They're saying that market is way bigger than the US market. There are way more potential consumers there. There's way more money to be made. So what do we need to worry about the US for? We can be based in the US, we can live in the US, but our model will be to sell into China. This is what, I mean, this explains everything you're seeing in Hollywood right now. This explains everything you're seeing from Silicon Valley, from the social media corporations. They're not interested in the US market. To them, you're an annoyance. You're a speed bump, right? You're a pothole. You're not a sovereign nation. You should just be quiet and keep clicking on Candy Crush, because that's all you're good for to them, right? They want to go into the Chinese market, and the CCP knows this is their comparative advantage. And this has been the same way since the 1800s. This used to be what China used to their advantage until the Opium War, and of course with the British and everything that they did to open up China through flooding the country with opium, then essentially declaring war on them, bringing them down. China spent 100 years rebuilding. Now through the CCP, they are becoming strong once again, and they want to be the preeminent actor on the world stage. You know, the name of China in the Chinese language, they call it Zhongguo, which actually means the central kingdom. And in many cases for CCP leaders, that is how they see themselves. They are the central kingdom. This is how it worked in ancient Asian history, where that they were the central kingdom, and every other country or kingdom that was around them, the King of Korea, King of Japan, Vietnam, etc., they were vassals to the emperor in China. That is their strategic goal, and that's where they want to be again. Only not for Asia. They want it to be like that for the entire world.
Yeah, and that's the Belt and Road Initiative you described. Isn't that the term that's used for that?
Right. So they're new. Right. I should have mentioned that. So this sort of debt trap capitalism or mercantilism, international mercantilism, that they call it the Belt and Road Initiative. And so this idea of these infrastructure buildings, these projects, mega projects that they're doing throughout the world, really in the developed nations, South America, in Africa, you're seeing this, Southeast Asia, more and more in Europe, actually, even in the European Union, you're starting to see more CCP money being get into the European Union. The Panama Canal, right? The Panama Canal is largely, many of the companies that run the Panama Canal are now in some of sort of these debt relationships, or if not outright purchased in full by Chinese companies or CCP type companies, right? So that's the Panama Canal. It doesn't get any more Western Hemisphere than the Panama Canal.
Well, you know what, though, if you think that's scary, folks, Jack, what are your thoughts? I have to get your thoughts on this because I did a whole show on the subject with a former CIA guy last week, Sam Faddis, who I think you know, about William Burns being the director of the CIA. Just in general, you know, I mean, he's a Chinese operative from what I can tell, and that's just a fact. It's a fact that based on his background. And the Senate confirmed him with even some Republican votes.
Yeah, well, you look, the amount of Chinese influence in Washington, D.C., the amount of Chinese money that's being put behind these think tanks like Brookings and others, right? You know, we're told, oh, we're just focused on the studies. Like, China understands how our system works better than we do, right? Better than the American people do in many cases. They know that the typical congressman, the typical senator doesn't like to have to do their own thinking. They want it outsourced for them. They want to be wined and dined, and the staff in Washington, D.C., which has way more power than people realize, they want to be wined and dined and flown around the world and taken to conferences. And they know, and you see this with staff, you see it with journalists here in Washington, D.C., that if you can bring these people around and wine and dine them, again, like people, even like Tony Blinken, right? When he got his, as you say, his butt handed to him when he went up to Anchorage by the CCP, who just blasted him in front of the entire world and told him what was going to happen. He had to leave with his tail tucked between his legs. he was sitting there scratching his head thinking, I don't understand. I've been whining and dining the CCP and their diplomats for so many years. How can they treat me like this? No, Tony, you don't get it. They were whining and dining you. They were giving you a false sense of comfort. They were giving you a false sense of security. They were the one in the driver's seat the entire time, because all you were looking for was for good relations. You talk to people on the left side of the aisle, and they think if they have a good meeting, then that's all that matters. Oh, we had a good meeting. They were polite, they were kind, we had a good meeting, right? They never ask for anything. They never ask for any tangible. They'll say, we brought up cybersecurity, we brought up economic security, we brought up this, we brought up that. But they never actually receive anything. They never receive any assurances. And this was something that, regardless of anyone's personal feelings on, this was something that Trump really cut through. He said, I don't care what they have to say. I want to see what they are doing. What deals are we going to cut? What tangible goods are we going to see? What money is going to exchange hands? It's whatever it may be, what military, diplomatic recognition when it comes to the state of Israel and the peace accords he was able to secure there, which are, you're seeing what's going on in Israel right now in just 100 days of Biden. You can see the difference between those that prioritize sort of what I call word thinking, the ability to thinking that, well, if they're repeating the words, then that's really all that matters, as opposed to actually dealing in reality, tangible, concrete reality, and understanding what outcomes are rather than just the, kind of falling for the flowery language.
Yeah, it's incredible. The Chinese Communist Party has come into our stock exchange. They don't have to, their companies don't have to follow the same rules because they got the United States to agree to allow them to be on the U.S. stock exchange without being audited by U.S. standards. And you can't even get a U.S. politician to step up and say, we're going to end this practice.
Keep in mind, a lot of the politicians and the sort of city planners in the United States, they go over to China and they say, this is amazing. This is incredible. Why? You guys can build whatever you want. You can spend whatever you want. You construct whatever you want. You don't have to worry about human rights. You don't have to worry about property rights. You don't have to worry about, the eminent domain process and going through any of these things and having any public say on anything. You just do whatever you want. And to someone who is that sort of technocrat, someone who doesn't truly believe in the ideals of freedom and liberty, or that people have the ability to, follow their own best interests, and that will lead to a better outcome, not only for your country as a whole, but for your economy, sort of in short, that it can be almost intoxicating. It can be intoxicating, that level of power, that level of ability and capability that the CCP model allows. And so you go to those technocrats, and it's no wonder that they really come back from this. And we would see this at the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, where I was, that folks would come in, learn about what China was up to, and say, my gosh, how can we do this back home? You have to remind them, hey, you can't do this in the United States. You can't just kick people out of their homes, right? Without any good reason. You can't just build stuff wherever you want to. I actually, funny enough, right where I am right now is I'm in that Northeast corridor. They want to put the maglev directly under my house, right? And so I don't know what that entails. We know we've had some public meetings on this. I don't know if they're talking about drilling it like 500 feet down. So I'm not even sure if it's something that would affect me. But I'm thinking, what is that going to do? What's that going to do to the water table in my area? What's that going to do to power, to pipelines? Are we going to be able to live here while you're constructing this thing? I assume you're going to have people going in and out of it. There's certainly a lot.
How much electromagnetic radiation
all
is going to put out 24/7?
The myriad issues. But when it comes down to it, look, and by the way, I am somebody who would prefer that the United States have a world-class train system. I also know that, politics being what they are in this country, it just doesn't seem to work out. Just they look at California, it just doesn't seem to work out.
Well, governments don't do trains well, as you could see by Amtrak. I mean,
certainly not.
They try. The post office, the same thing. I mean, there's a way to get it done and have the government be involved. It's just not the way that it's been done in the past.
Right. Well, listen, Colonel, I actually have to get running. I've got a I've got a hit coming up here for the show.
Well, thank you very much, Jack Posobiec. Tell folks real quick how they can find you, and we appreciate having you on, my friend.
Thank you so much. You can find me, just go to on One American News, OANN.com, also antifabook.com. That's the new website, antifabook.com. The new book is up there. It'll be out in about 2 weeks.
All right, sir. Thank you very much, and my best to the family, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you very much, Carl.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was One American News Network's Jack Posobiec, Navy veteran, intelligence officer, Chinese expert, really, on the Chinese and the Chinese Communist Party. And culturally, I think he's an expert on what's going on in American culture and other cultures around the world, and how that is affecting what we, people my age and older, or maybe a little bit younger, think the United States will look like in the future. You know, some of the things he said really put some of my concerns to rest, but others do not. I wish that the generations could come together, find some common ground, and come up with solutions to address some of these things, like the student loan debt issue and those kinds of things, and the forever war policy. That's what we need to continue to work for. I will do that as a citizen. I hope you will too, is to do what's right for the American people, and to heck with everybody else. So that's it for the Rob Maness Show this week. Until next week on Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern, I'm Rob Maness.